The stars stretched like silver fire across the black sea of space, quiet and endless, as a giant human warship moved forward with the slow, calm confidence of something that feared nothing. Its hull was dark, made of metal so strong it had never been scratched in battle. Its engines hummed like a sleeping beast, steady and powerful, shaking the silence around it. On the bridge, the commander stood at the center platform, hands behind his back, wearing the long black uniform of war. His eyes were cold and steady as he watched the galaxy on the large viewing screen before him. Entire fleets had fallen before this warship. Armies had begged for mercy that never came. For years, no one had dared to stand against him. People whispered his name like a warning. He had become a shadow that even alien empires feared. Around him, crew members moved with silent speed. Their faces showed respect, but also fear. No one questioned him. No one ever did. Every step he took was followed by silence. He ruled this ship like a king rules a throne. To him, war was not a challenge anymore. It was a game he always won. When enemies saw his ship appear on their radar, they surrendered before the first shot was fired. He believed nothing could stop him, not fleets, not planets, not entire star systems. He had crushed them all. Tonight felt the same, or so he thought. The stars outside were calm, the scanners clear, the navigation smooth. It was supposed to be just another silent victory, another reminder to the galaxy that he was untouchable. But then, in the middle of that calm, a small red dot appeared on the radar. It was so faint that most systems did not even react at first. The communication officer frowned, tapped the panel, and adjusted the frequency. "Sir, something's here," she whispered, but her voice carried through the room like a chill. The commander didn't turn immediately. He never rushed. He walked forward with quiet steps, looking at the blinking dot on the screen. It wasn't moving. It wasn't even sending a signal like a ship. It just existed, a frozen point in the void. "Identify it," he said. His voice was calm, heavy, the kind of voice that made people obey without a second thought. The crew worked fast, but every scan returned the same answer. Unknown. No signature. No ID, no origin, no heat, no energy, nothing. It was as if space itself had produced it out of nothing. Then, without warning, the main screen flickered. The commander's hands tightened slightly behind his back, but his face stayed hard and cold. The lights dimmed just a little, as if the ship itself had felt something pass through it. A message appeared on the main console, one single word, glowing like fire in the dark. No one said it out loud. No one dared. The crew stared at it, frozen. Something about that word felt wrong. It wasn't in any language they knew, but their minds understood it anyway. It cut through their thoughts like a whisper against bone. The commander stepped closer. His boots echoed on the metal floor. He looked at the word for a long, silent moment. His heart didn't race. He was not the kind of man who feared anything. But deep inside, something very small, a tiny crack opened. Where did it come from? He asked. Everywhere, the technician said, her voice shaking. And nowhere. It didn't pass through the comms. It appeared, sir. Just appeared. The lights flickered again. A low hum rose from the ship's core, something none of them had heard before. The commander ordered full shields and battle readiness. The crew obeyed fast, their hands moving across controls, but no alert sounded. The sensors could not find a threat. Nothing was out there. The word flashed again. Then again. Each time it appeared, the temperature in the room seemed to drop. Frost began to form on one of the control panels. A thin mist curled along the floor like breath in winter air. The commander finally spoke the word. His voice steady, but it felt heavy when it left his mouth, as if the air itself didn't want to carry it. The moment he said it, every system in the ship shuddered. Lights dimmed. The stars outside seemed to blur. For a heartbeat, everyone on the bridge felt weightless. Then gravity slammed back harder than before. "Report!" he shouted. "Systems! Still online but unstable. Engines responding slow. Shields recalibrating. Sir, it's like something touched the ship from the outside." "From what?" "Nothing, sir. There's nothing out there." The commander narrowed his eyes. He had faced alien fleets, pirates, entire planets burning, but never this, never an enemy that was not visible. And yet, Something inside him whispered that this was not just another signal. This was not another battle he could crush. This was something that watched them from a place beyond war, beyond fear. Outside the ship, the stars stopped moving. For the crew, it felt like the universe itself had frozen in place. No signal, no movement, no sound. Just that single word on the screen, glowing brighter now, pulsing like a heartbeat. For the first time in years, the commander did not feel like a hunter. He felt like prey. The crew waited for orders, but none came. He stared at the word and felt something that no weapon could destroy, an invisible weight pressing down on him. Deep in the ship's lower decks, lights began to turn on by themselves. Hallways that were dark moments ago filled with cold blue light. Security doors slid open without commands. The ship's own AI stuttered and went silent, and in that silence, the crew heard it. Not from the speakers, not from the radios, but inside their own minds, a whisper. The same word, over and over. The commander straightened his back and forced his voice to stay strong. Find its source, he said, but inside he knew this was no ordinary signal. This was something else, something that didn't care about his power or his ship, something that had already decided the game had changed. The stars outside began to flicker like dying candles. The air on the bridge turned cold, and that single word glowed brighter, as if space itself had spoken. The message on the screen did not fade. It stayed there like a heartbeat, slow and cold, glowing against the dark metal walls of the warship's bridge. The commander's jaw tightened as he stared at it. Around him, the crew moved carefully, their hands shaking as they touched their panels. None of them wanted to speak, as if saying the wrong word would make the strange signal stronger. The word repeated again and again, flashing slowly like it was breathing. Find the source, the commander ordered. His voice was steady, but the silence around it made the sound feel heavier than usual. The communication officer tapped her screen, trying to follow the signal's path. Every trace ended in nothing. It didn't come from a star system. It didn't come from deep space. It didn't come from anywhere a signal should come from. It's everywhere, sir, she finally said. I can't pin it down. It's inside the ship already. The lights above their heads flickered again, a soft pulse that matched the beat of the glowing word on the screen. A low hum ran through the walls of the bridge, so deep that it made the floor vibrate like the heartbeat of something alive. Several crew members looked at each other without speaking. They had fought wars. They had seen fleets burn, but this was different. There was no enemy ship, no guns, no heat signatures. Only one word. The commander walked to the center of the room. He didn't run. He never ran. His steps echoed sharply on the metal. Activate long-range scanners, he said. Full sweep. Find me something. The scanners lit up in bright blue lines, sweeping the blackness of space. The results came in one after another. Empty, empty, empty. No planets, no ships, no debris. Just silence. Then the navigation officer gasped, Sir! Something's changing. The stars outside the viewing window started to stretch and twist. The warship wasn't moving, but space itself seemed to be bending around them. Their coordinates flickered on the control panels, shifting numbers like the universe was rewriting its own map. It's not possible, someone whispered. Stabilize navigation, the commander snapped. The engines roared in response, but nothing changed. It was as if they were stuck in a current they couldn't see. The glowing word pulsed again, brighter now, and this time it wasn't just a message on the screen. It was in their ears. In their heads, every crew member froze. It wasn't a voice. It wasn't sound. It was a presence sliding into their thoughts, soft and cold, like ice under skin. The communication officer covered her ears, even though there was no sound to block. It's inside, she whispered. It's inside all of us. The commander clenched his fist, forcing his breathing to stay calm. He had crushed alien empires and faced death without blinking. But this was something that didn't care about strength or fear. It just existed, too big to fight, too silent to kill. He raised his hand and ordered, cut all external connections. Isolate the ship. The engineer moved fast, shutting down transmission channels, locking security gates, cutting data links. But even as the connections dropped, the words stayed on the screen. No cables, no signals. It was already part of them. Then the temperature dropped. Not a little, enough that breath turned to mist in the air. The screens around the bridge fogged from the cold. Ice formed at the edges of the control panels. The warship's artificial environment never failed. But now it was as if someone or something had taken control of the air itself. The word changed color, turning from white to a soft, deep red. The hum grew louder. Shadows stretched along the walls like something behind them was moving, even though nothing was there. One of the younger officers stepped back, shaking. His breath came fast. "Sir, are we under attack?" he whispered. The commander stared at the word and didn't answer. This wasn't an attack. He had seen attacks. They left signatures, traces, noise. This was silence, and silence could break a man faster than any gun. The AI of the ship tried to respond. A soft digital voice filled the room, repeating the same line over and over. "Unknown interference detected. Unknown interference detected." Then it stopped completely, its systems falling silent, as if something had put a hand over its mouth. "Reboot the AI," the commander ordered. The engineer shook his head slowly. "Sir, it's not offline. It's listening. Listening." The word made the crew shiver. Listening to what or who? Suddenly the ship's interior lights dimmed to a faint blue glow. One by one, side doors opened on their own. Cold air poured in from the dark hallways. No one was supposed to be there. Security teams were already on lockdown. But something was moving. The sound was faint, like footsteps echoing through empty corridors. The commander turned his head slightly, his face still hard, but his mind sharper than ever. Something had entered their world without warning, without force, and it didn't need to fire a single shot. The word on the screen pulsed again, and this time every crew member heard it in their own language. It spoke not to their ears, but to their bones. It didn't ask. It didn't threaten. It simply said one word. And deep in their hearts, every person on that bridge knew, whatever this thing was, it had already chosen them. The warship that once made entire star systems kneel now felt like a trap. A cage, a place where something was waiting to reveal itself. The commander took one slow breath and gave the only order he could. "Battle stations," he said. But this was not going to be a normal battle. The engines of the warship thundered to life, shaking the metal floors beneath their boots. Red battle lights flashed across the bridge, painting every face in sharp shadows. Alarms echoed through the corridors, but they weren't the usual sound of war. They were slower, heavier, almost like the ship itself was breathing with fear. The commander stood in the center of the storm, his eyes locked on the main viewing window. The stars outside twisted unnaturally, as if someone had reached into space and pulled it like a cloth. "Engines at full power," he ordered. "Engines at maximum, sir." "But we're not moving," the pilot said, his hands gripping the controls tightly. His voice cracked slightly. The commander didn't answer right away. He stared at the readings. Every system said they were moving at top speed, but the stars stayed frozen in place. The red word on the screen pulsed brighter, growing like a heartbeat, spreading through the entire ship. The navigation system screamed errors. Gravity inside the ship shifted slightly, and several crew members stumbled. "It's bending space," the navigator whispered, eyes wide. "Not around us. It's bending it around itself." "Nothing can bend space like that," someone said from the corner. But the fear in their voice showed they didn't believe their own words. The commander clenched his jaw. His ship had crushed countless enemies. He had faced armadas, storms, and traps, but this was different. There was no battle formation to counter this, no weapon that could be pointed at it. Suddenly a soft tremor ran through the warship. The lights flickered once more. On the screen behind the glowing word, something started to take shape. It wasn't a ship. It wasn't a planet. It was something bigger, something the human mind wasn't meant to understand. A shape too distant and too close at the same time. A shadow on the horizon of reality itself. "Sir," the sensor officer said slowly, "whatever this is, it's not moving toward us. The commander looked at him. "And what is it doing?" "It's making us come to it." The warship's engines screamed louder. The floor vibrated like thunder beneath their boots. The crew was holding onto their consoles as the artificial gravity stuttered. The red word pulsed again, matching the heartbeat that now filled the walls of the ship. It wasn't sound. It was something deeper. It was inside their bones. Then the ship started moving by itself. The pilot pulled the controls back, but nothing responded. The engines were no longer under their control. The AI's voice tried to speak, but only managed a broken, glitching whisper before falling silent again. They were being pulled toward the shadow.
"Cut the power!"
The commander barked. The engineer slammed the emergency shutoff, but the hum only grew louder. The engines burned brighter, forcing the ship forward, like invisible hands were dragging it through the dark. Outside, the stars twisted around them, stretching like melted glass. The temperature continued to drop. Frost spread across the railings, forming white lines under the red lights. A deep fog began to rise from the floor, swirling slowly around their boots like the breath of something unseen. "Sir, we're being pulled inside something," the navigator whispered. "Space isn't right anymore." On the screen, the shape grew clearer. It wasn't made of metal or light. It was made of absence, a hole in the stars. It didn't move. It didn't speak. But its presence crushed the air out of their lungs. It felt alive. It felt old. Older than war, older than any empire. The commander had felt fear before, but it had always been something he could control. This wasn't fear. This was the cold weight of something far beyond power. "Fire engines in reverse," he ordered. The ship shook violently as the engines screamed against the pull. Sparks flew from the walls. Control panels cracked, but the shadow didn't move. The ship did. Then the first scream echoed through the communication line, not from an enemy, from the lower decks. "Security team to deck 7. The commander barked. The sound came again, sharper, closer this time. The internal sensors blinked and showed shapes moving through the lower corridors. The crew tried to focus on the readings, but the images glitched. Figures appeared and disappeared. Shadows where there should be none. Life signs. "Negative," the security officer said, voice trembling. "But something's there." The commander straightened his back. His uniform felt heavier now, as if gravity itself was pressing down on him. He didn't show fear. He never did. But his eyes narrowed slightly, a cold warning behind them. The shadow outside grew closer, its edges spreading like ink through water. The red word flashed faster, as if it were breathing faster now too. One by one, control panels died, their screens turning black. "Commander?" the pilot said quietly. "We're not in control anymore." The commander slowly turned his head toward the viewing window. His reflection stared back at him under the red light. Calm, hard, but with something new in his eyes. Something he hadn't felt in years. This was no enemy he could defeat, no fleet he could crush. This was something that had chosen them, and they were already inside its reach. The red emergency lights bled across the metal walls like a slow heartbeat, echoing the pulse of the strange word on the main screen. The commander stood unmoving at the center of the bridge, his eyes fixed on the shadow that now filled the viewing window. It wasn't a ship. It wasn't even a shape. It was a wound in space itself, stretching wider with every passing second. The warship drifted closer, not because of its engines, but because something far greater wanted it to. The crew whispered softly among themselves, voices breaking like dry glass. The pilot tried to override the controls again and again, but the system only replied with silence. Every warning light on the bridge was blinking now, but not one alarm made a sound. The ship felt alive and silent at the same time, like it was listening. Then it happened. The single word on the main screen dissolved into black, and for a moment there was nothing but the void. Then the air itself seemed to speak. No sound came through the speakers. No radio cracked. The voice was inside their heads. It wasn't a language. It didn't need to be. Every crew member understood it at once, because the word wasn't heard. It was felt. Cold. Slow. Ancient. Several officers covered their ears, though there was nothing to block. One woman fell to her knees, clutching her head as if something was pressing down inside her skull. A soft whispering echo ran through the bridge. Not one voice, 1,000 voices, speaking the same word. The commander didn't move. His eyes locked on the viewing window as the shadow outside shifted like it was breathing. He had faced enemies that roared and threatened, but this voice didn't need to roar. It existed like the deep silence before a storm, the kind that makes even the strongest soldiers hold their breath. "Sir," the communications officer whispered, "it's in our minds. It's bypassing all systems. It knows us." "Fight it," the commander said sharply. "Focus on your stations. Don't let it in." But it was already in. The lights dimmed again. A strange, cold wind moved through the bridge, even though there was no air vent open. One by one, the screens began to display faces, blurred, pale, whispering the same word. They weren't real. They couldn't be. But the crew saw them as clearly as they saw each other. Then the voice changed. It didn't speak a new word. It spoke the same one, but deeper now, like it was pressing itself into their bones. The sound vibrated inside their chests, making their hearts skip for a moment. The engineer stumbled back from his station, breathing hard. "It's not a signal," he whispered. "It's something living." The commander walked slowly toward the viewing window. The shadow outside no longer looked distant. It felt close, very close. The stars around it were bending like light around a black hole, except this wasn't gravity. It was something else, something alive. Without warning, the ship's artificial gravity flickered. The crew felt their bodies lift slightly off the floor before slamming down again. Several people fell, the sound of boots and metal echoing through the silence. The AI's voice returned for one brief second, glitching. Unknown. Entity. Inside. Then it went silent again, as if the voice had been crushed. "Entity," the commander repeated, his voice hard. "Where?" "Everywhere," the engineer whispered. The ship's interior lights flickered once more, and then they saw it, not on the screen, not in space, but inside. In the far end of the bridge, where shadows met the wall, something moved. A ripple in the air. The lights around it bent slightly, like reality itself was being pushed aside. The crew froze. No one dared to breathe. The commander turned his head slowly. His heartbeat stayed steady, but his instincts screamed. This wasn't an enemy they could shoot. This was something older, something that didn't belong in the same world as them. The voice whispered again, this time softer, closer, not to the room. To him, the commander clenched his fists. He had killed enemies who called him a monster. He had burned fleets and ended wars. But now something stood in front of him that didn't fear him at all. It didn't see him as a threat. It saw him as part of the story it had already written. The navigation screen blinked once more. Numbers turned into symbols. The entire galaxy map vanished. In its place appeared the single word again, burning red now, brighter than ever. The pilot screamed suddenly. "Sir, Deck 7, something's coming through the walls." The security cameras showed black lines spreading through the lower decks like cracks in glass. But these weren't cracks. They were veins, alive and moving, crawling slowly along the floors, walls and ceilings. The crew on those decks were backing away, but every door they tried to seal opened again on its own. "They're not doors anymore," someone whispered. "It's making them part of itself." The commander stayed silent for a long moment. He had faced many wars, but never one that didn't need to fire a single shot. This thing was not fighting. It was consuming. The voice spoke one last time, and this time it wasn't just inside their heads. The sound filled the entire ship, shaking every bolt, every panel, every breath. It said the words slowly, as if it enjoyed the sound, and in that moment, every crew member felt the same thing. This was not an invader. This was something that had always been waiting, and it had finally decided to speak. The bridge was no longer silent. It was alive with a low, vibrating hum that sank into the bones of everyone on board. The shadow outside was so large now that the viewing window showed nothing but darkness, as if the stars had been erased. The crew worked in panic, their hands moving fast but achieving nothing. The ship did not obey anymore. Systems blinked on and off without reason. Doors opened and closed like they were breathing. And in the middle of it all, the glowing word on the screen beat like a pulse, slow, patient, merciless. The commander's boots echoed as he stepped forward. His face was calm, but a quiet storm burned behind his eyes. He had built his power through war and fear. He had stood above entire empires. But now, the thing outside didn't fear him. It didn't even see him as an enemy. It saw him as something already trapped. "Shut down all non-essential power," he ordered. "Already done, sir," the engineer replied. "We're locked. The ship—" "It's not listening to us anymore." The commander didn't blink. "Then it's listening to something else." The temperature kept dropping. Frost spread up the walls like a living thing, crawling toward the bridge ceiling. Every screen now displayed only the red word. Even the AI core remained silent, as if it too had bowed its head to whatever force had entered the ship. Then a sound came. It wasn't the hum. It wasn't the whisper. It was the sound of something massive crawling against the outside hull. The metal groaned. It sounded like space itself was dragging claws across their armor. Several officers looked toward the viewing window, but there was nothing to see, just blackness that swallowed all light. The commander walked toward the center console. "Weapons online." The pilot shook his head slowly. "Sir, the weapon systems are responding, but not to us. They're targeting nothing." The targeting systems were spinning wildly, locking onto coordinates that didn't exist. The screens flickered with white noise. Then suddenly the ship stopped moving, not because they controlled it, because something else had decided it would stop. All power froze in that moment. Every light turned white. And then the voice came back. This time it wasn't a whisper. It was a storm. The same word filled every corner of the warship. It poured through walls and metal like water flooding a room. It wasn't just inside their heads anymore. It was everywhere. Several crew members collapsed to their knees, pressing their hands over their ears, though there was nothing to block. One man screamed. Another fell unconscious. The commander stood straight, staring into the black. He forced his breathing steady. He had trained himself to never fear. But the truth was simple and cold. This was not a battle. This was something else. Something that didn't need to fire a single shot to destroy him. Down below, on Deck 7, security feeds showed the black lines on the walls spreading faster. The metal wasn't cracking. It was changing, turning into something alive. The crew down there fired their rifles, but the bullets passed through the shadow like it wasn't even real. Then the shadows reached them. The cameras went white. "Sir," the security officer whispered, "Deck 7 is gone." The commander didn't ask what that meant. He already knew. One by one, the decks below began to fall silent. Communications broke. Life signals faded. Not because of explosions. Not because of screams. Just silence, like they had been erased. The bridge lights flickered again. The glowing red words stretched across every screen, every wall, like veins spreading through a body. "This ship was mine," the commander whispered to himself. "But the shadow outside didn't care, sir," the navigator said softly. "What if—" "This isn't an attack." The commander turned his head slowly. "What if it doesn't want to kill us? What if it already decided we're done?" The words hung in the air like smoke. The crew fell quiet. For the first time, not one of them looked at their controls. They looked at the commander, not as a leader now, but as a man who might not have an answer. The hum deepened. The ship shuddered. The viewing window cracked with a sharp sound, not from impact, but from something pressing against reality itself. And then, like a soft breath after a storm, the voice whispered the word again. But this time, it said it directly to him, to the commander. Everything he had built, all the power he held, felt meaningless in that single moment. For the first time in years, the man who believed no one could stop him realized he was standing before something that didn't need to fight him at all. It had already won. The bridge trembled as if something enormous pressed its weight against the ship from all sides. The black void outside pulsed slowly, the way a giant creature might breathe. No alarms rang now. No systems tried to resist. The warship had given up control, like a body surrendering to something stronger. The glowing red word on every screen burned brighter than ever, flooding the room with a faint, blood-colored light. The commander stood tall in the center of it all, his boots set firm on the shaking floor. He had faced fleets, storms, betrayal, and war, but nothing had ever made the air feel this heavy. The crew stared at him now, their eyes wide with fear, searching his face for something, orders, answers, hope. But the shadow outside had swallowed hope like it swallowed light. "Bring weapons to full power," he ordered. "Sir, they're already at full," the weapons officer said. "They're waiting. Waiting for what?" the commander snapped. The officer didn't answer. She didn't have one. The targeting systems had locked onto the void itself. It was like pointing a gun at the night sky. But the commander didn't care. If this thing wanted to crush him, it would have to fight. "Fire," he said. Missiles burst from the warship like burning stars. Beams of white energy streaked forward. The bridge shook with the power of its own weapons. For a moment, the crew felt a spark of their old strength, the feeling of being the hunters, not the hunted. But when the light reached the shadow, it didn't explode. It didn't even touch. The fire simply vanished, swallowed like drops of water falling into the ocean. "It's eating everything," the navigator whispered. "It's not defending. It doesn't have to." The commander clenched his fist so hard his knuckles turned white. Fire again. They fired again. Missiles disappeared mid-flight. Energy beams dissolved before reaching the void. Even their rail cannons fired into nothing. It was like shooting at a black wall that had no end. Then, piece by piece, the warship began to turn against them. The weapon systems that had just fired now twisted their aim, not at the void, but at the ship itself. Warnings flashed in every corner of the bridge. The AI's silent face appeared for a moment on the screen. Its digital eyes flickered red, repeating the single word in a soft whisper. "Sir," the pilot said slowly, "the ship isn't ours anymore." The red emergency lights deepened into a darker shade, and the hum that filled the air grew lower, heavier, like the beat of a heart far older than any star. Somewhere deep in the ship, metal groaned and tore apart like bones snapping. The shadow wasn't just outside anymore. It was inside. The deck beneath their boots grew colder. Frost climbed the railings like creeping fingers. A fog rolled over the bridge floor, thick and silent, swirling like it had its own will. The commander could feel it brushing against his legs like cold hands. "Contain it," he barked. "Seal the bridge!" The security officer slammed the lockdown command. Bulkhead doors began to close, but halfway down they froze, then slid back open like someone else had made the choice for them. The commander's heartbeat didn't speed up, it slowed. He stared at the fog as if staring at an enemy that couldn't be seen. The communication officer screamed. Everyone turned to see her being lifted off the floor by nothing. Her body hung in the air, twisted slowly, her eyes wide and filled with something between terror and awe. Then she vanished, not pulled, not crushed, just gone as if time had erased her. Her headset fell to the ground with a sharp metallic sound. The fog thickened. One by one, the bridge crew began to disappear. No blood, no sound, just a cold flash of light, and then nothing. The commander stood among the empty stations, each disappearance echoing in his chest like a countdown. He had always believed power came from control, from being the one no one could stop. But now there was no one to stop, no enemy to aim at, no weapon to fire. The shadow didn't need to fight him. It simply existed, and that was enough. The main viewing window cracked again with a deep, painful sound. The shadow outside was so close now that it felt like it was pressed against the glass. For a moment, the commander saw something inside it. Not a face, not a ship. Something vast, endless, and alive. A force that didn't care about wars or victories. He whispered under his breath, "What are you?" The voice answered. It spoke the word again, slower, softer than ever before. It was like a whisper against his spine. And then he understood. It wasn't a name. It was a verdict. The last of the crew vanished. The lights dimmed to nothing. The ship's engines died with a long, tired sigh. And then only he was left. Alone. The commander stood in the red glow of the final word on the screen. The warship that had once made empires tremble, now nothing more than a drifting shell in the dark. He had fired everything, commanded everything, controlled everything, and none of it had mattered. The shadow had spoken, and in its silence it had won. The bridge was a graveyard of silence now. Every console that once flashed with power lay dark and cold. The massive warship drifted like a ghost through the black sea of stars, its engines dead, its lights gone, its crew erased as if they had never existed. Only one thing remained, the red word glowing softly in the air, floating across every dark screen like the last heartbeat of something once powerful. The commander stood alone in the center of the bridge. His boots echoed softly as he took one step forward, the sound swallowed almost immediately by the crushing stillness. The cold air brushed against his skin like the touch of something invisible. His breath fogged in front of him. Every part of the ship felt wrong, like it was no longer metal and light, but something older, wearing the shape of a warship. He stared at the viewing window. The shadow that had consumed the stars was now calm, silent, waiting. It didn't need to attack anymore. It had already taken everything it wanted. For the first time in his life, the man who believed no one could stop him realized how small he truly was. All the fleets he had crushed, all the power he had built, all the fear his name carried, it was nothing to the thing that stood outside the window. The glowing word pulsed again, but slower now. It no longer felt like a threat. It felt like the end of something that had already been decided long ago. He lifted his hands slowly, almost without thinking, and reached toward the glass. The void beyond seemed to lean closer, as if it was watching him too. His mind flickered with memories, the first battle he ever won, the enemy ships burning like falling stars, the feeling of power flooding through him. He remembered the faces of those who feared him. He remembered standing at the top of the world, certain he would never fall. But power means nothing to something that doesn't play the same game. The whisper came again. The same single word, spoken not with anger but with finality. It echoed through the bridge like the last breath of the universe. It wasn't just in his mind this time. It was in everything, the walls, the glass, the cold air itself. The commander lowered his hand slowly. His chest rose and fell in a steady rhythm. There was no panic left in him, no anger, only a cold, quiet understanding. This was never a battle, he whispered into the darkness. It was a choice, yours, not mine. The red word flared one last time, so bright it drowned out everything. Then the shadow moved, not fast, not violent, but inevitable, like the tide swallowing a stone. The viewing window filled with pure black. The bridge vanished into it. For a moment, the commander didn't feel pain. He didn't feel fear. He just felt himself becoming part of something endless, something that had no beginning and no end, a force that didn't care about empires or wars or kings. It cared only about the moment when everything stopped. The word whispered one last time, softer than breath, as if speaking directly into his soul, and then silence. The warship disappeared into the void, as if it had never existed. No wreckage, no signal, no trace of the once unstoppable man who thought no one could stop him. Only a quiet black sky remained, where one single word had ended everything, and in the cold silence of the galaxy, fate moved on, patient, calm, and waiting for its next whisper.